All right, your SEC Insider hit this morning is brought to you by Mississippi Sports Medicine and Orthopedic Center. Any age, any sport, any injury, they've got you covered. New surgery center and clinic. Lakeland Drive, Flowood, Mississippi Sports Medicine and Orthopedic Center. Any age, any sport, any injury. We're live in the Bank Plus studio. You're listening to the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. We are streaming on the Out of Bounds radio app. We want to welcome in Dallas Cowboys insider, NFL Network. Bobby Belt joins us on the Miller Lite guest line. Bobby, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Bo. I'm doing well. How are you?
Man, we're doing great. We're doing great. We've covered Dak Prescott for a long, long time, all the way back to really 2010, 11. Young man from North Louisiana signs with Dan Mullen. Eventually takes over in 2013, and the rest is history. Totally changes the trajectory of the Mississippi State football program. We've known he was good for some time, kind of a head-scratcher that he fell to the fourth round. People just refused to buy in that he could play. He goes through a lot of that as the Dallas Cowboys starter and QB because they're the biggest brand in American sports, although he's had a tremendous amount of success. It's still amazing to me how many people doubt him, but that's part of it. Why did you feel like you had to, basically put together this piece, which was very well done, debunking the 9 myths of Dak Prescott, Bobby?
I mean, it was really born out of just the fact that I was kind of exhausted from having to do it over and over again on social media with people. It's frustrating because at each turn, when there reaches a point where the criticisms that come up about Dak Prescott are absolutely no longer valid by all objective evidence that we have. And so I understand when the questions arise or when the points first arise, but the frustrating thing is that no amount of evidence ever seems to change the arguments. And he consistently provides evidence to the contrary of all the arguments that are laid out before him. And it's just when you look at across the board, the most standard statistical arguments, the advanced analytics, the, all the other measures you want to apply, the way that other coaches and scouts and everybody talk about him, he's, very easily, very comfortably in the top 10, and he's arguably a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. And it's this odd, he's the most odd case study in the NFL of certain people refusing to accept how good he is. And I don't know what's behind it. For a lot of Cowboys fans who don't accept it, I'm sure it's, still a little bit of hurt feelings or anger or whatever else that Tony Romo didn't get his job back. For other people, it's, they don't want to admit they were wrong after they dug in so hard against him early.
I agree with that the latter part. Yep.
Because
as sports fans, Bobby, when we dig in and we come up with an opinion, we don't want to go back on that. I mean, especially as hard-headed guys. Guys, we're all hard-headed. We love sports. We love talking about it over beers and with our buddies and the trash talk and the fantasy football teams and going to events. And so once we decide, well, Dak Prescott's not a really good NFL QB, that's it. And, it's – all right, so would you say that it's here are two things that I think about, two reasons why this thought process is out there. And again, Bobby Belt, NFL Network on the Miller Lite guest line. One is it is incredibly difficult to shake that he was a 4th-round pick and he's good. And two, when you wear the star on your helmet, it just opens you up for an enormous amount of criticism because the Cowboys are just about always in a primetime spot and slot, and because of the coverage of that team, and people either love or hate him. Love or hate them. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's probably a large part of it. But even that latter part doesn't explain away the block of maybe like a third of Cowboys fans that talk about him the way they do, which is difficult to pinpoint. I think, again, that's probably more based on a bitterness over the fact that Tony Romo never got his job back. But, I mean, I think the fact that Tony Romo never got his job back speaks volumes to the type of player, and more specifically the type of leader that Dak is. I mean, flat out, what a lot of people don't seem to understand is Dak Prescott kept that job because the players weren't going to allow it to go back to Tony Romo. That would have been a chemistry killer. Dak came in there, and guys were playing more free than they had under Tony in years. And it's because Tony had kind of reached celebrity quarterback status, I think, a little bit. And there's kind of like this tiered sort of social system, it felt like, in the locker, I think. And he was on a level, Romo was, that didn't, jibe with most of the rest of the locker. And I think when Dak came in there, he was kind of, the man of the people. And he was somebody who I think all the guys, especially on offense, really gravitated towards. And so in terms of the fan base that still doesn't want to accept him, I think it's mainly just over that. They feel like you stole Tony Romo's last opportunity to win a title. But, I mean, I think the bottom line is that 2016 team doesn't play as well with Tony as they do with Dak, even if at that point Tony was a better player potentially, which is debatable. You weren't going to get the same output from the rest of the team just based off of chemistry.
Okay. Bobby Belt, Dallas Cowboys insider, NFL Network. He joins us on the Miller Lite guest line. He's written a great piece, The 9 Myths, basically debunking the 9 myths on Dak Prescott and who he is and what he is as an NFL QB. Now, if you would like, what is your number one? What is your favorite? I'd like to probably take your top 3. Let's start with your favorite myth on Dak Prescott, Bobby.
Well, in terms of the one that gets me going the most and is the most irritating is just generally all the objective evidence has run counter to the argument at this point. So what everybody falls back on at this point is some variation of the phrase, my eyes tell me. My eyes tell me he's not good. Well, my eyes tell me this and yada, yada. And that's, in theory, going to be the toughest one to swat back just because it's vague. There's no real set of standards. You can't bring evidence back to somebody's eyes. You can't really do much to that. But I mean, there's an objective way to argue why that's not a standard that you can use, and that's just flat out you are not. When all the evidence runs counter to that, you sitting on your couch in a Dallas suburb are not more equipped to use your eyes. You don't have eyes trained by the NFL. You don't have eyes paid by the NFL to make those sort of decisions and make those sort of eye tests that guys like Sean Payton, who's raved about Dak Prescott, Bill Belichick, Mike McCarthy, the Cowboys front office, which for all the chatter people have about, the Cowboys don't really trust Dak Prescott. They would have paid him already. You can see there's, they clearly have questions about him too. Okay, well, they used the non-exclusive franchise tag, which means they paid extra money than they needed to in order to completely secure his rights alone. And in paying that, we're negating the possibility of a team coming in and signing him and giving Dallas 2 first-round picks. And then using that exclusive franchise tag, you left Amari Cooper exposed, who was almost signed away by the Redskins. And you ended up paying him $100 million, making him the second highest paid player at his position. So you thought well enough of Amari Cooper to pay him all that money, but you thought so much of Dak Prescott that you were willing to pay more money to potentially risk losing Amari Cooper. And so I think that basically what that one comes down to is your eyes aren't qualified to make those calls. And, that'll always just get people riled up and shoot back. And I've watched football for 20 years, and I lettered for 3 years in high school, and and that's kind of the retort that comes back. But
right,
that's the one that's most common. But I think the silliest one that you can debunk the easiest is people talking about he doesn't show up in big games or he's not clutch. Or
expand on that. Yes,
in big time. So I think that people look at the Philadelphia game without any sort of context, which was that Philly game last year. Yeah, it was bad, but I think it's important to also look at that's really his first big critical crunch time loss in 4 years. He had a bad shoulder, so bad that he couldn't throw even a single pass during the practice week that week after getting hurt against the Rams the week before. Amari Cooper, who did not get along with his receivers coach, Sanjay Law. Sanjay Law kept him out on the final critical drive, so Dak Prescott didn't have Amari Cooper, his number one receiver. And
that's unacceptable, by the way, by that wide receivers coach.
Yeah, and it's the reason why he's gone now, and Amari Cooper stayed. But I think that you look at the fact that it was another lackluster performance by the defense, so bad that Chidobe Awuzie, their cornerback, their third-year cornerback, who was a second-round pick, was actually benched in that game for a lack of effort. And so I think that there's a lot of contributing factors to that one outlier. But even as an outlier, the week before was a huge game against the Rams, which they beat them by 20-plus points. And Dak played outstanding even after getting his shoulder hurt. His entire 2016 rookie season was a big game with playoff implications because the Giants were on their heels for seeding the whole rest of the way, and Dallas won out. And you look at the fact that he had to perform in order to hold off a guy who was trying to get back his job. Not just a guy who was trying to get back his job, but a guy that the front office and the fans really wanted to get back his job if Dak would just slip up and give him the opportunity. And it didn't happen. And I think you look at, 2018 and going on a 5-week run of big victory after big victory to keep them in playoff contention and ultimately win the NFC East and then beat Russell Wilson in the first round of playoffs in the wild card round. He has a consistent history of winning big games. But, yeah, he did have a bad shoulder, and it was raining, and he didn't have Amari Cooper, and they lost by a touchdown and 2-point conversion on the road in Philly. So, I guess, yeah, you do get that one. But then I think the other one is outside of just the big games, if you look at the crunch time moments, there's really no bigger – there's really no higher stakes than a tie game late. So if you look at since 1994, which is as far back as you can research this, because this is as far back as Pro Football Reference's statistical data goes, there have been about 80 quarterbacks that have attempted at least 40 passes when the game is tied in the fourth quarter or overtime. So late in the game, tie game, the stakes can't really get any higher. And during that time, those 80 quarterbacks of the last quarter century, the top 3 highest passer ratings are Rich Gannon at 111, Kurt Warner at 120, and then Dak Prescott at 150.5, which is astronomically high. And if you look at the passing touchdown leaders, second overall is Tom Brady, 7. Dak Prescott's played 4 years now. He leads all quarterbacks over the last 26 years in touchdown passes in those situations. He has 8 touchdowns, no interceptions, 76% completion percentage. The completion percentage is the highest among the 80, and his 10.9 yards per attempt is the highest. So he is literally blowing, Hall of Fame quarterbacks out of the water over the last 25 years or so in, the biggest statistical categories of the most critical crunch time situations. And so you can blow back any of it. But then, of course, when you provide that, guys will go, yeah, well, my eyes tell me that he doesn't or something.
Unbelievable. Boy, Bobby Belt just hurt some feelings. Cowboys Insider talking Dak Prescott. Follow Bobby on Twitter, @BobbyBeltTX. And then he's also got his podcast, the Boys and Girl podcast on The Herd. We talk about Colin Cowherd and The Herd and so on. We dropped some of his audio yesterday. And then, of course, he's also with the NFL Network. You're listening to ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Bobby Belt on the Miller Lite guest line. Now, Bobby, I'm going to get to you in just a second, Blake. I know you're chomping at the bit. But okay, so, Bobby, we've had 4 NFL insiders on the show that don't have any ties to the Cowboys or Dak that have said unequivocally that Jason Garrett was below average and or awful, a terrible head coach, okay? And now my argument is can first of all, what you just said, he's played outstanding. He's an outstanding player even with Jason Garrett. But why wouldn't you want to give him a chance with a Mike McCarthy who's proven he can win in the postseason, and he may not be great, but he's a good NFL coach, and he's won in the postseason. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I would also say look at the quarterbacks he's worked with throughout his career, going back all the way when he was an offensive assistant at his very earliest stop with the Chiefs when he was working with Joe Montana. And you look up through his history, you got, Joe Montana and, then you got Aaron Brooks and Alex Smith and Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. And he's a guy who has always, excelled in working with quarterbacks and getting quarterbacks ready to go. Mark Bulger was another one that he worked with for a little bit of time in New Orleans. So he's a guy that knows good quarterback play, knows the talent, knows how to foster it, knows how to grow it, and is a guy who, from all accounts, from everybody you talked to in the organization, he was really excited at the chance to work with Dak Prescott. Make no mistake, Mike McCarthy wants Dak Prescott here. Mike McCarthy thinks he can win a Super Bowl with Dak Prescott. And so I think that, again, as much as fans may want to dig in, that smaller minority of fans who don't want Dak Prescott or don't think Dak Prescott's worth it, you need to get ready because he's going to get paid. When it's going to be, I don't know. What it's going to be, I don't know. But the Cowboys are going to pay him. They have to. And I think the decision makers in place are all going to be fairly comfortable with it. They may kick and scream along the way because that's what these teams do in all contract negotiations. They dug in hard against Des Bryant, DeMarcus Lawrence, Ezekiel Elliott, and in the end they always fold.
Right.
And they pay it, and then they get up there and talk about how happy they are at the press conference to have paid it. So.
Bobby Belt, NFL Network, Dallas Cowboys Insider podcast, the Boys and Girl podcast on the Herd. He joins us on the Miller Lite guest line and ESPN 105.9 The Zone. You can watch the show on our YouTube channel, search Out of Bounds Sports. And Blake has a question for Bobby Belt.
Yeah, Bobby, Blake Scott here. First off, I'm as high as I've ever been listening to you talk about this stuff. I mean, it's incredible. I'm like smiling ear to ear over here. I have two. So your number two, for those who haven't read the article, your number two debunking myth is Ezekiel Elliott carries Dak Prescott.
Oh, yes.
And your number five is Dak is not an elite passer. I think those go hand in hand because if you think Dak's not an elite passer, then you obviously think Zeke carries him. Can you we got like 5 minutes. Can you kind of go through why Zeke doesn't carry the ship and why, because Dak's an elite passer, you can prove that Zeke doesn't carry the ship?
Yeah, I think that when you look at it, the Zeke argument is one that people make because he was so dominant as a rookie and he's had gaudy statistics now for his first 4 years. And so it's an easy leap to make to say, chicken or the egg, what sets up the other? Well, that one sets up Dak. I don't blame people for defaulting to that. I blame people for holding to it when evidence is presented to the contrary, but I understand why people jump there or make the assumption. And it's also because the first 3 games Elliott was suspended in 2017, they lost 3 straight games by 20-plus points, and Dak didn't look so great. But what that fails to acknowledge is those first 3 games of the suspension, Sean Lee and Tyron Smith were missing. You could argue that Tyron Smith was their best player on offense, and Sean Lee was their best player on defense at the time. And then when those guys came back and Elliott was still missing and it wasn't a bunch of patchwork on a bunch of different areas, not just running back in those first 3 games, then the last 3 games of the suspension, Dak played fine. And if you actually look at the last 4 games that Zeke has missed, and this is the thing people have generally forgotten about, I guess. They just think of those first 3. But the last 4 games that Ezekiel Elliott's missed, Dak is 4-0. 3 of the victories were on the road. 3 of the victories were against division opponents. He has 10 touchdowns between the air and the ground, just 2 interceptions. His yards per attempt is 8.5, and his passer rating is 106. And so he's done more than fine without Ezekiel Elliott. He's actually performed above his career numbers the last 4 games that Ezekiel Elliott's missed. And then I think when you look at, being an elite passer, which I really thought last year would have quashed a lot of the criticism. I thought he took so many leaps forward as a passer. I thought it was going to clear up a lot, but facts aren't things that they're interested in generally in the Dak Prescott debate. And so, but I think whatever measure you want to use, if you want to use standard statistics, okay, last year he was top 5 in passing touchdowns and, adjusted net yards per attempt, and he was, one of the better, but he had nobody was better as a deep ball passer in the NFL last year. And this is hard data. This is advanced stuff, that nobody in the NFL was better last year as a deep ball passer than Dak Prescott. And it was not close. That Dak Prescott was the best deep ball thrower in the NFL last year. And that really cancels out a lot of the stupid idiom that you heard from people was Dak and dunk instead of dink and dunk during his first couple of years, that, he was just a guy who threw underneath passes, forgetting, the whole time that the actual guy who really fits that bill is in their own division, and Carson Wentz, who consistently has games under 7 yards per attempt. But you look at the advanced metrics there, QBR, which the analytics community loves. They think it's a more encompassing, better gauge than passer rating is. It was the formula created by ESPN some 10 years ago. Since 2016, when Dak entered the league, he's the only quarterback in the NFL to finish top 4 in QBR 3 times. Nobody else has done that. Not Drew Brees, Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, anybody else you want to throw out there. Dak is the only one to finish that high. So if you look at the standard statistics, you can, he's 5th in the NFL history in passer rating. A lot of people don't seem to realize that. He is, by standard metrics, pretty comfortably in the top 10, bordering on top 5. And when you look at the advanced analytics, you would have to definitively say among advanced analytics, since he got in the league, he is a top 5 quarterback.
Bam. We'll leave it there. But we're going to have Bobby on again. Don't worry. But as some people are somewhat maybe driving off the road. But that was a lot of fun. 20-something minutes with Bobby Belt. Follow Bobby on Twitter at BobbyBeltTX. He's got his podcast, the Boys and Girl Podcast, with Jane Slater, who does a magnificent job. It's on the Herd platform. Of course, we talk about Colin a good bit. I hope that Bobby will spend about 30 minutes explaining this to Colin. And look, I love giving him a heart. Colin's super talented and got a great show, one of the best in the country. But he has fun with his whole Dak Prescott takes, too. Hey, Bobby, super stuff. Appreciate you coming on. We want to do it again in a couple of weeks. And take care, man. Keep up the good work.
Absolutely. Appreciate you guys.
Bobby Belt, Dallas Cowboys insider, the NFL Network. 9 myths, Blake Scott, debunking those that don't think that Dak Prescott is a big-time quarterback. I love the quote he used, "My eyes tell me." I tell my buddies who, anyway, I don't have time to wrap that up. We're going to have Jeff Good coming up next. Looking forward to that. Talk some food and booze with Jeff Good. Bravo Italian Restaurant and Bar, Sal and Mookie's in Fondren, and Broad Street Bakery